My dad stood in my hospital room doorway with his suitcase already packed. I was in a hospital gown, IV in my arm, surgery scheduled for 4 hours later. He kissed my forehead and said, "You'll be fine, sweetheart. You're strong." Then he wheeled that bag straight down the hallway because his new wife's birthday trip to Savannah couldn't wait, not even for his daughter's surgery. But 3 days later, the hospital called him back. And whatever they told him, he drove 6 hours through the night to get there. If your family ever made you feel like the last priority, stay with me, because this story will hit different. And if it does, subscribe and drop a comment. I read every single one. My name is Nora. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I want to start by telling you something that took me a long time to admit out loud. I spent most of my life being the daughter who never caused problems, never asked for too much, never made a scene. I paid my own way through college, handled my own heartbreaks privately, and whenever something in my life broke down, financially, emotionally, physically, I figured it out myself, quietly. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. My dad, Raymond, was not a bad man in the obvious ways. He didn't drink. He didn't disappear for years. He showed up to my graduations, remembered my birthday, called on holidays. On paper, he was present. But there's a difference between a father who shows up and a father who actually sees you. Raymond showed up. He just never really saw me. My mother passed away 6 years ago, ovarian cancer. It was fast and brutal, and it hollowed our family out in ways I don't think either of us ever fully recovered from. I grieved in silence. Raymond grieved by eventually moving on, which I understood. I did. He was 61 years old and lonely, and I was not going to be the daughter who made him feel guilty for wanting companionship again. But then came Cheryl. Cheryl Dawson, now Cheryl Maddox, was 54, twice divorced, and she had a laugh that filled every room she entered, whether you wanted it to or not. She and Raymond met at a church social 18 months after my mother died. They were engaged within the year, married 7 months after that. I stood at their wedding in a pale blue dress, and I smiled until my face hurt, because that's what you do. That's what good daughters do. I tried with Cheryl. I genuinely did. I had her and Raymond over for dinner. I asked about her grandkids. I sent her a birthday card that first year with a real handwritten note inside. But Cheryl had a way of making you feel like a guest in your own father's life. She'd redirect conversations. She'd answer questions Raymond was asked. She'd plan holidays and mention them to me last, like I was a courtesy invite, not family. And Raymond let her. That was the part that quietly broke something in me. Not Cheryl's behavior, but Raymond's silence about it. His willingness to smooth everything over rather than acknowledge what I was experiencing. Every time I tried to bring it up, gently, carefully, he'd sigh and say, "Nora, she's trying. Can you just give her a chance?" As if I was the problem. As if my discomfort was the inconvenience. I swallowed it. Year after year, I swallowed it. And then in February of this year, I started having pain. Sharp, radiating pain under my right ribs that would come on suddenly and drop me to my knees. I ignored it twice. The third time, I was alone in my kitchen at 11 at night, gripping the counter with both hands, and I knew something was genuinely wrong. The ER confirmed it 2 days later. Gallstones, severe. My gallbladder needed to come out, and it needed to come out soon. The surgeon scheduled me for the following Thursday morning. I called Raymond that same evening. He picked up on the third ring, and I could hear the television in the background. Some home renovation show Cheryl always had on. I told him calmly. I gave him the date. I told him it was a real surgery, general anesthesia, overnight stay likely. And there was this pause on the line, just long enough for me to feel it in my chest. "Thursday," he said slowly. "Nora, that's Cheryl's birthday weekend. We already booked Savannah." I remember the exact sound of my own silence on that phone call. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I just went very still inside. The way you go still when something confirms what you already suspected but kept refusing to believe. "I know," I said, and I kept my voice completely even. "I just wanted you to know the date." Raymond exhaled, this long, slow breath that I'd heard 1,000 times growing up. It was the breath that meant he was about to explain something to me, justify something, wrap something uncomfortable in reasonable-sounding words until it felt like my fault for bringing it up. "Sweetheart," It's a laparoscopic surgery. You told me that yourself. 3 small incisions. You're home the next day. It's not, it's not open heart surgery. I let that sentence sit there between us for a moment. No, I said quietly. It's not. Cheryl's been planning this trip for 4 months. Her kids are flying in from Atlanta. It's a big thing for her, Nora. And there it was, laid out so plainly, so cleanly. His new wife's birthday celebration, with her children flying in, her joy, her milestone, versus his daughter's surgery. And he'd already done the math. He'd already made the calculation before he even answered the phone. The pause I'd felt wasn't him thinking. It was him searching for the right words to deliver a decision he'd already made. I didn't argue. I want you to understand that. I didn't cry, didn't guilt him, didn't say any of the things that were building pressure behind my sternum like a closed fist. I just said, "Okay, Dad. I understand. I'll figure it out." And I hung up. Then I sat on my kitchen floor, not dramatically. I just sort of slid down the cabinet until I was sitting on the cold tile. And I stared at the refrigerator for a long time. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't sob, it just settles into your bones like cold weather and stays there. My best friend Diane, she'd known me since college, knew every version of me. She answered when I called her 20 minutes later. I told her what happened. She didn't say much at first. Then she said, "I'll be there Thursday morning, 6:30 a.m. I'll bring coffee." That's what real love sounds like. No hesitation, no math. Raymond called back the next morning. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Old habit, like reaching for something that's burned you before. He said he'd been thinking. Said he felt terrible. Said maybe Cheryl and her kids could start the trip without him, and he'd drive down Friday after I was settled. He said it like he was offering me something generous, like partial presence was a gift. "Dad," I said carefully, "the surgery is Thursday morning. I'll be home by Friday evening. There's nothing to drive down for." Another pause, and then, and I will never forget this, he sounded almost relieved. "See? So you'll be fine. You're so capable, Nora. You always land on your feet." I've thought about that sentence every single day since. You always land on your feet. As if my ability to survive abandonment was a personality trait to be admired, rather than a wound he'd spent 30 years inflicting. "Have a good trip, Dad," I said, and I meant it as a goodbye in a way I don't think he understood yet. Wednesday night before my surgery, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark of my apartment staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly, and I thought about my mother, about how she used to hold my hand in waiting rooms, doctor's offices, dentist chairs, anywhere that felt scary. She had this way of squeezing 3 times without saying a word. 3 squeezes meant I'm right here. Nobody was going to squeeze my hand 3 times tomorrow. But something else happened that Wednesday night. Something I hadn't planned, exactly. But that part of me had clearly been moving toward for a long time. I opened my laptop, and I started making some calls. I want to be careful about how I explain what I did that Wednesday night, because I don't want it to sound calculated or cold. It wasn't revenge I was thinking about. Not yet. What I was thinking about was protection. There's a difference, and that difference matters. See, 3 weeks before my surgery diagnosis, Raymond had called me about his will. Casual conversation, or so it seemed. He mentioned he'd been meaning to update some paperwork, that he wanted everything to be clear and organized. He asked me a few questions about a savings account my mother had left specifically in my name, whether I'd ever accessed it, what the balance looked like. I answered him honestly, the way I always did. Because that's who I was. The daughter who never thought she needed to protect herself from her own father. But something about that conversation had lodged itself in the back of my mind like a splinter. Small enough to ignore, uncomfortable enough to never fully forget. So that Wednesday night, sitting cross-legged on my bed with my laptop open and surgery 12 hours away, I called my mother's attorney. Walter Gaines, the quiet, methodical man who had handled my mother's estate 6 years ago, and who had, on the day the will was read, pulled me aside privately and said, "Nora, if anything ever feels off, you call me first, before anyone else." I'd thought that was just lawyer caution at the time. Professional instinct. Now I wondered if Walter had seen something I hadn't. He answered on the second ring despite it being nearly 10 at night. I apologized for the hour. He said, "Don't apologize, talk." So I talked. I told him about Raymond's questions regarding my mother's savings account. I told him about Cheryl, about the marriage, about the way Raymond had been slowly reorganizing his financial life in ways I only caught glimpses of. A refinanced house here, a changed beneficiary mentioned there, things I'd filed away as none of my business because I was always trying not to be difficult. Walter listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to need you to do something for me before your surgery tomorrow. Can you scan and send me 3 documents?" He told me exactly which ones. My mother's original will, a letter she had written, notarized, 6 months before she died, specifically regarding a property in her name that she had verbally promised to me, and a bank document showing the account she'd opened in my name alone in 2018, the year before her diagnosis. I had all 3, organized in a folder in my filing cabinet the way my mother had taught me. Keep your important papers close and your copies closer. I scanned them at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night, IV bruise still fresh on my arm from the ER visit, and I sent them to Walter with shaking hands. Not because I knew what was coming, but because something deep and quiet inside me, some instinct that had been whispering for months, told me that Raymond's sudden interest in my mother's financial paperwork was not innocent, and that whatever he was planning it for a moment when I was distracted, vulnerable, grateful enough for his basic presence that I wouldn't ask questions. He'd handed me the perfect distraction himself. A surgery I'd be recovering from. A weekend he'd be 4 hours away with his wife and her family, unreachable and unaccountable. I closed my laptop at midnight, set my alarm for 5:30, and I lay back against my pillow and I thought, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm not going in completely unprotected anymore. That thought didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel unbearably sad. Because no daughter should have to protect herself from her father the night before her surgery. No daughter should have to do that. I fell asleep with that grief sitting heavy on my chest, and I didn't dream at all. Diane was at my door at 6:28 Thursday morning. 2 coffees, a blanket she'd pulled from her own couch, and that specific expression she gets, steady, no nonsense, completely present. She didn't say it'll be okay, or you've got this, or any of those phrases people use when they don't know what else to offer. She just handed me my coffee, picked up my overnight bag, and said, "Let's go." That's the whole sentence. Let's go. And somehow it was exactly enough. The drive to Cincinnati General was quiet. Cold February morning, the kind where the sky is that flat gray that makes everything feel muted and far away. I watched the city pass through the passenger window, and I thought about how strange it is, how completely strange, to be heading toward a moment where someone is going to put you under, open your body, remove something from inside you, and you just have to trust that you'll wake up on the other side of it. I'd done the pre-op paperwork days before, so check-in was fast. A nurse named Sandra, warm, unhurried, the kind of person who makes clinical spaces feel almost human, got me settled in a pre-op bay, adjusted my IV, and went through the standard questions. Emergency contact. I'd listed Diane, not Raymond. I'd changed it 2 days before the surgery, quietly, when I updated my hospital patient portal. Another small thing. Another quiet act of self-preservation I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. Sandra asked if I was expecting anyone else. I said no. She nodded like that was a perfectly complete answer and moved on. I loved her for that. Diane sat in the chair beside my gurney, and we talked about nothing important. A show she'd been watching, a terrible date she'd been on in January, the coffee shop near her office that kept getting her order wrong. Normal, ordinary, blessedly mundane things. And I was so grateful for every single word of it because it kept me from thinking too hard about the empty space where a father should have been standing. At 7:50, they started wheeling me toward the OR. Diane walked beside the gurney as far as they'd let her. At the double doors, she grabbed my hand. Squeezed 3 times. I had to close my eyes. She knew. I'd never told her about my mother's 3 squeezes, but she knew. I went under counting backward from 10, and I made it to 7. When I woke up, the recovery room was dim and quiet and smelled like antiseptic and something faintly floral from a diffuser on the windowsill. My mouth was dry. My abdomen felt like someone had pressed a hot iron against it from the inside. But I was awake. I was on the other side. Diane was there within minutes of me being moved to my room. She'd waited 4 hours without complaint, without leaving, without anything except a finished paperback novel and an empty coffee cup. She looked up when I was wheeled in, and the relief on her face was so visible, so unguarded, that it almost undid me completely. Hey, she said softly. Hey, I managed back. My phone was on the bedside table. I looked at it once, then looked away. There was a text from Raymond, sent that morning at 7:03, which I calculated was probably right around when he and Cheryl were checking into their Savannah hotel. It said, "Thinking of you today, sweetheart. Call me when you're out. Love, Dad." I stared at that message for a long time. Thinking of you. From 400 miles away. From a coastal hotel with ocean view rooms and birthday dinner reservations. Thinking of you. As if proximity of thought was a substitute for presence of body. As if love worked like that. As if I would read those words and feel held. I set the phone face down on the table. And that's when the room phone rang. It was a landline ring, that flat, institutional sound that hospital room phones make. Diane and I both looked at it. Nobody calls hospital room phones anymore. Not really. It's almost always administrative, a pharmacy confirmation, a discharge coordinator, something procedural and forgettable. I reached over and picked it up. "Ms. Maddox?" A woman's voice. Calm, professional, measured in the way that immediately tells you this isn't a routine call. "Yes," I said. "This is Dr. Patricia Ellison. I'm the attending physician overseeing your post-operative care. I need to speak with you about something we discovered during your surgery. Are you alert enough to have this conversation right now, or would you prefer I come back in an hour?" My heart rate monitor ticked up slightly. I could see it on the screen beside me. "Now is fine," I said. "Please." She came to my room 12 minutes later, early 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She pulled a chair directly to my bedside, not to the foot of the bed, not standing at a clinical distance, but right beside me, and that told me something before she said a single word. "During the procedure," she began carefully, "we identified some tissue irregularities that were outside the scope of what we were there to address. We've already sent samples to pathology, and I want to be transparent with you. We flagged your family medical history as part of our standard protocol. Your intake forms listed your mother as deceased from ovarian cancer." "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. "I don't know how. Given that history, and given what we observed today, we're recommending an immediate follow-up with oncology. I want to be clear, we are not giving you a diagnosis right now. What we are saying is that what we found requires urgent attention and proper evaluation." The room felt very far away suddenly, like someone had turned down the volume on everything except my own heartbeat. Diane reached over and took my hand. Dr. Ellison continued, "Genetic risk factors, monitoring protocols, the importance of first-degree family medical history in cases like mine." And then she said something that stopped me completely. "We also need to flag something administratively. Your intake forms, the ones completed when you first registered as a patient here 2 years ago, list your father as a secondary medical contact with access to your health information. Under HIPAA, that means he would typically be notified of significant findings alongside you unless you formally revoke that access." I blinked. "I updated my emergency contact 2 days ago." "You updated your emergency contact, yes, but the medical information release form is a separate document. It wasn't changed." There was a long pause in that room. "So he would be contacted," I said slowly. "Our administrative team would reach out to him, yes. Standard procedure for significant findings. Unless you'd like to revoke that authorization right now, which is absolutely your right and takes effect immediately." I thought about Raymond in Savannah. Raymond with his coffee on some hotel balcony, Cheryl laughing beside him, her birthday dinner already planned, her children already there. Raymond who had looked at a surgery date and calculated that a birthday trip outweighed it. And I thought about Walter Gaines and the documents I'd sent him at 11:30 the night before. About the savings account, about the property my mother had left me, about the quiet, methodical way Raymond had been asking questions he had no business asking. I thought about all of it in about 4 seconds flat. And then I made a decision that I have never once regretted. "Don't revoke it," I told Dr. Ellison quietly. She looked at me carefully. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said. "Let them call him." Diane stared at me after Dr. Ellison left the room. Not with judgment. Diane never judged me, not once in 14 years of friendship. But with that particular look she gets when she's trying to understand something I haven't fully explained yet. "Nora," she said carefully, "what just happened?" I shifted against my pillow, wincing slightly at the pull in my abdomen. "I let the hospital keep Raymond as an authorized contact." "I heard that part. Why?" I looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I told her. All of it. Walter Gaines, the Wednesday night phone call, the documents, the savings account, Raymond's casual questions about my mother's financial paperwork 3 weeks prior. I told her about the property my mother had notarized in my name, about the way Raymond had been quietly reorganizing things in the background while keeping me just comfortable enough not to look too closely. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "So you think he was planning to move on something while you were recovering?" "I think," I said slowly, "that a man who chooses a birthday trip over his daughter's surgery and then coincidentally starts asking detailed questions about her deceased mother's assets 3 weeks before that surgery is not operating from a place of love." She nodded. Once. Slowly. "And now the hospital is going to call him," she said. "And now the hospital is going to call him," I confirmed. We didn't say anything else about it for a while. A nurse came in to check my vitals, adjust my pain medication, bring me ice chips and a small cup of apple juice. Normal, quiet hospital afternoon sounds, the PA system in the hallway, a cart rolling past, someone laughing softly at the nurse's station. Life continuing its ordinary rhythm while mine sat completely suspended. I dozed for a while. When I woke up, it was nearly 4 in the afternoon, gray winter light cutting low through the blinds, and Diane was still there. Shoes off, feet tucked under her on the chair, reading her novel again. My phone lit up on the bedside table. Raymond. I watched it ring. 4 rings. 5. Voicemail. 40 seconds later, a text. "Nora, call me right now, please. The hospital just called. What is going on? Why didn't you tell me?" I read it twice. That last sentence. Why didn't you tell me? As if I owed him information I hadn't been given yet myself. As if his being notified entitled him to my immediate response. As if the appropriate reaction to learning your daughter may have a serious medical concern was to send a text that read like an accusation. I set the phone face down again. Diane had seen the screen light up. She raised an eyebrow. "He texted," I said. "What did he say?" I read it to her word for word. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Why didn't you tell him?" Not as a question, as a repetition. Letting it hang in the air between us so we could both hear exactly how it sounded. "Yeah," I said. "Raymond called 3 more times in the next 2 hours. Left 2 voicemails. The first one concerned and confused, the second one edged with something that sounded uncomfortably close to irritation. As if my not answering was an inconvenience he hadn't budgeted for. As if my medical situation was something I was using against him. The second voicemail ended with, "Nora, I need to know what the hospital told you. This affects me too, you know, call me back." This affects me too. I replayed that line 3 times, not because I couldn't believe he'd said it, but because I could. Because of course he had. Because this was Raymond, and Raymond always found a way to position himself at the center of every story, even the ones that were never about him. I put the phone in my overnight bag, zipped it shut, and I slept the most peaceful sleep I'd had in months. I was discharged Friday afternoon. Diane drove me home, settled me on my couch with a heating pad, 3 days' worth of groceries she'd already bought, and strict instructions not to lift anything heavier than a television remote. She stayed until 7, made me eat actual food, then left only after I promised to text her every morning until my follow-up appointment. I had 14 missed calls from Raymond by the time I got home. I didn't call back that night or Saturday morning. I needed 48 hours of just being in my own body, processing what Dr. Ellison had told me, sitting with the uncertainty of the pathology results, without Raymond's voice layered on top of it, reshaping everything into something about him. Walter Gaines called Saturday afternoon. I answered immediately. "How are you feeling?" he asked first. Genuinely. Waited for the actual answer. "Sore," I said honestly. Scared about the pathology, strangely calm about everything else. "That calm is earned," he said. "Don't question it." Then he got to business, because Walter was always efficient without being cold. "I've had 2 days to go through everything you sent me. Nora, I need you to understand something clearly. Your mother was very deliberate about her paperwork. She protected you in ways you may not have fully realized." My throat tightened. "What did you find?" "The property, the house on Meadowlark Drive that your grandmother originally owned and passed to your mother, was transferred into a trust in your name alone in 2019. Your mother did it quietly, 6 months before her diagnosis. Raymond was never a beneficiary, never a trustee. His name appears nowhere on that document. I closed my eyes. But here's what's significant, Walter continued. 3 months ago, a title company in Cincinnati received a request to run a preliminary ownership search on that property. The request was filed under a name I recognized immediately. It was Raymond's real estate attorney, a man named Douglas Pell. The heating pad hummed against my side. Outside my window, a car passed slowly through the wet February street. He was going to challenge the trust, I said. It wasn't a question. He was building a case too, Walter said carefully. Whether he had legitimate grounds is another matter entirely. He almost certainly didn't. Your mother's paperwork is ironclad. But a challenge, even a baseless one, creates delays, creates legal costs, creates pressure on the person being challenged to settle rather than fight. I thought about Raymond's phone calls, 14 of them, the voicemail, "This affects me too," the text, "Why didn't you tell me?" All of it suddenly arranged itself into a different shape. He hadn't been calling out of concern for my health. He'd been calling because the hospital notification had disrupted his timeline. Because whatever Douglas Pell had been quietly assembling needed Raymond present, available, and, most importantly, needed me distracted and grateful and not asking questions. A surgery recovery was the perfect window. 6 to 8 weeks of reduced capacity, pain medication, emotional vulnerability. The kind of period where a daughter might sign something her father slid across a table without reading it too carefully because she was exhausted and hurting, and he was the only parent she had left. Except I hadn't been distracted. And now Walter had everything. "What do we do?" I asked. "We do nothing yet," Walter said. "We let him come to you. And he will come, Nora." The hospital notification rattled him. His calls tell me he's operating from panic now, not strategy. Panicked people make mistakes. He was right. I knew he was right. "And when he comes," I said quietly. Walter's voice was measured and absolutely certain. "When he comes, you let him talk. You don't argue, don't explain, don't reveal what you know. You just listen. And then you call me." I sat with that for a moment. "Okay," I said. "One more thing," Walter added, almost gently. "The pathology results, whatever they say, fight that battle first. Everything else can wait 3 days. You take care of yourself first." I exhaled slowly, long and uneven. "Thank you, Walter," I said. He said, "Your mother chose well when she trusted me with this. So did you." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time, just breathing. The heating pad still humming, rain beginning softly against the window, and somewhere in the distance, I heard a car slow down on my street, then stop, then a door open and close, then footsteps on my front path. I knew it was Raymond before he knocked. Something in the specific weight of those footsteps, unhurried but purposeful, the walk of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say. I sat completely still on my couch for 3 full seconds. Then I stood up slowly, steadied myself against the armrest, and walked to the door. He looked diminished. That's the only word I have for it. Raymond Maddox, who had always carried himself with that particular quiet confidence of a man who believed things would generally arrange themselves in his favor, looked small standing on my front porch in the February rain. His jacket was damp at the shoulders. His eyes moved over me quickly, assessing, and I watched something flicker across his face that might have been genuine relief that I was upright and functional. Or might have been calculation confirming I was well enough to have a conversation. "You didn't call me back," he said. "No," I said. "I didn't." A pause. Rain tapping steadily on the porch roof. "Can I come in?" I stepped back and let him in. Not because I was ready to forgive him, but because Walter had said, "Let him talk." So I let him in and I sat back on my couch, and I folded my hands in my lap, and I waited. Raymond sat in the armchair across from me, the same armchair my mother had picked out when she helped me furnish this apartment 4 years ago. He looked uncomfortable in it, which felt appropriate. He started with concern, asked how I was feeling, how the surgery went, whether I was in pain. I answered in single sentences. "Fine. Well, some." He nodded after each answer like he was filing information away. Then he shifted. I watched it happen, the almost imperceptible straightening of his posture, the clearing of his throat, the way his hands moved from his knees to his lap. "The hospital called me," he said, "about what they found." "I know," I said. "I authorized that." Something moved behind his eyes. Quick. I want to be here for you, Nora. Whatever this turns out to be. I want to be involved. I want to help. I looked at him for a long moment. Like you were involved Thursday morning. His jaw tightened slightly. That's not fair. Raymond. I used his name deliberately. Not Dad. Raymond. And I watched that land on him like something physical. I'm going to say something and I need you to just listen. He nodded slowly. I know about Douglas Pell, I said quietly. I know about the title search on Meadowlark Drive. I know about the questions you asked me 3 weeks ago about Mom's savings account. And I know exactly why you asked them. The color shifted in his face. Not dramatic, just a subtle draining, the way a room looks when a cloud passes over the sun. Nora. I'm not finished, I said. Still calm, still quiet. Mom protected me. She did it years ago, quietly, completely, in ways you apparently didn't realize until recently. Walter Gaines has every document, every original, every notarized copy. There is nothing to challenge, nothing to contest, and nothing to negotiate. It's done. It was always done. Raymond opened his mouth, closed it. I'm not angry, I said. And the terrifying thing was, I meant it. I'm just finished. Finished being the daughter who makes herself smaller so you can be comfortable. Finished being grateful for partial presence. Finished. The rain had softened outside, almost quiet now. Raymond sat in my mother's armchair, and he looked like a man who had arrived expecting a negotiation and discovered there was nothing left to negotiate with. No leverage, no opening, no version of this conversation that ended in his favor. He left 20 minutes later. No dramatic exit. No shouting. Just a man walking back out into the rain, smaller than he'd arrived. I closed the door, stood in my hallway, and breathed. The pathology results came back 4 days later. Benign, treatable. Monitored going forward, but not the thing I'd feared in that hospital room. I sat in Dr. Ellison's office and cried with pure, uncomplicated relief for the first time in years. I called Diane first, then Walter, then nobody else. Because here's what I learned. Lying in a hospital bed alone, documents already sent, quiet decisions already made. The people who show up when it costs them something are your family. Everyone else is just someone you used to know. Raymond texts occasionally. I read them. I don't always respond. Maybe someday that changes. Maybe it doesn't. But I am standing in my own life now, fully, finally, without apology. And that feels like something my mother would recognize, something she planned for, even from wherever she is. 3 squeezes. I'm right here. Yeah, Mom, I finally am too.